Welcome back. Episode 53. Just a quick solo episode this week. Haven't spoken a lot to Chris. Both of us have been a bit busy. Yeah, just thought I'd do a bit of an update on something I've been thinking about and writing about recently. And it's in relation to what we would call in the track world marker sessions. And I suppose we call a marker session a session that we know as a guideline what condition or what state either ourselves when I was running and or my athletes would be at leading up to competition. And it's a little bit like, it's a testing session technically, but I think if you have a few of these marker sessions dotted throughout your programming, specific stages or phases of your blocks, then you can use these to actually adjust your programming along the way. And as an example, in a speed endurance phase, we would do sessions like, 2 times 3 300s, for a 400-meter runner. For the 200-meter runner, they might do 2 by 2 times 300. So they would still jump in with the session with the 400-meter runners, and they might have every second one out, but they would start back a little bit because they're going at higher speed. We would always try and adjust our session so all the guys could run together. Otherwise, you are technically or typically programming individual athletes on their own, and the idea of a squad is turning up and being able to run with your mates and so forth. Yeah, so during the endurance phase, let's say the 400-meter runs are doing 2 by 2 times 300 meters. They would know, and I would know, their times based around those sessions if they're off 3 minutes or 4 minutes rest, and they know their RPE, I suppose, and how they're feeling during that session to give them a really good guide of where they're at in their training at the moment. So, and obviously if some of the guys know that it's a 92% session and they've had to reach up to 95 and they're completely spent, or they're just making it back to the start line, we would typically start the 300-meter mark on a running track, run to the finish line, then we'd take a slow walk back to the 300-meter start. And you can clearly tell or quickly tell the athletes that are just struggling. They're struggling back to the line, and they're really having to work hard to keep up. If an athlete's starting to really struggle, and your athletes quite well, I would just drop them out, put them up a couple of staggers, which would give them, somewhere between 3.5 and 7 meters start on the rest of the field, or just end the session and change the session for them altogether, or basically make them walk away. Again, we would have all these different types of sessions, and I'll give a few examples in a moment from a track running point of view, but this can be applied and is applicable across any type of training. I've been doing a little bit of high rocks recently and competing in high rocks, trying to help some athletes, particularly new athletes, get involved in high rocks. And I think we can also take some of these sessions and use them as a guide or a marker session throughout your high rocks training. And you can pick any session basically. Let's say you just set up a session, and I set one out for somebody the other day, a 400-meter run, 10 back squats at 70% of your 1RM, a 25-meter sled push at race weight, 25 meters or 30 meters of walking lunges at race weights, and a 400-meter run. Now, if you said, let's take a session like that and do 6 rounds and just record your time, 1 minute rest at each round, I'd recommend just to, set it up like a proper, nearly like an interval type session. And then at the end of that session, you just take a time, and then you might actually test it again in 3 weeks' time. You may not do that exact session. You may do similar types of sessions along the way, and then in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, you just test that session again. And you can quickly tell, particularly if you go into it fresh, on how you feel. We would call that a marker session. As a track runner, one of my favorite marker sessions was 3 times 200 meters. This is leading up to my 400s. And literally for me, if I could nail this session, I would always know that I'm in 400-meter shape. If I didn't run very well on the day, it was either I got my taper wrong, I got my fueling wrong, I didn't sleep well, or I just, something went wrong that week. Particularly if I got this session right about 15 days out, I would normally do this particular session. Sometimes I might even do it 6 weeks out, then have another go at it. But I always knew this 3 times 200-meter session, and it was always typically running these 200s at your first 200 of the 400 meters down the back straight. So I would actually run the first 200 and have 6 minutes rest, and then I'd run the second 200. The second 200 off 6 minutes rest, and the third 200 off 8 minutes rest. So it'd be 200, 6 minutes rest, 200, 8 minutes rest. And I would always aim to be within 0.2 or 0.3 of a second of those 200s. And if I couldn't actually nail that, and if I was a long way out, or I had to really reach to get there, I knew I hadn't done the work. And it's a little bit scary sometimes, because if you've only got 2 weeks to go and you do that session and you miss it by a long way, you're like, okay, I'm just not in shape. And if you competed as long as I did and you knew the other athletes that you were going to be competing against, you would typically be thinking, okay, I'm not in great shape. So it can have a bit of an adverse effect sometimes for some athletes. I was one of those athletes. If I didn't hit it, I'd be all over the place and thinking, okay, I'm not going to run very well. Half the battle is, as we all know, is turning up and racing on the day. You never know what your competitors, what shape they're in and where they're at in their training cycle, and if they're going to turn up and race well. So you can only do your best on the day. But I think it's really important to have some of these test sessions along the way that you sprinkle in throughout the year, and they can be different sessions, as I was saying before, depending on what phase you're in. If you're in a speed phase, a strength endurance phase, a strength phase, and applicable to any sport, basically, particularly individual sports. And again, going back to Hyrox, I think they're very applicable to these hybrid type sports. Hyrox being very measurable and all the set stations. So endurance runners clearly are measurable. It's clearly applicable to endurance runners as well. You can have, your 3x3K time, or your 10 1Ks, or your 800s, or whatever it may be. You always know yourself, okay, I can normally do these 800s in this particular time of this particular rest. And if you nail that session, that you're in pretty good shape. So yeah, I'm going to make it pretty short today. I just wanted to touch on that. I think it's a really good thing to keep in mind. And you don't need a specific coaching program or to be some, amazing athlete to work this out. Once you've got a bit of time under your belt in the gym, I think you start becoming familiar, or if you've been running for a little while, you start understanding how you feel, and if you're going out for a particular session that you've done in the past, you will know how it feels, and you might have a bit of a benchmark. So I think it's an interesting way to train and just keep track of some of these sessions. And as I said, in the track world, we call them marker sessions. Call them what you want, but I think they're a good way to record and use them for a good guide to see where your training's at. I'm going to keep it very short and sweet. That was all I wanted to talk about. I wrote a bit of an article in one of the newsletters about it the other day, actually, my Hyrox newsletter, I think. That's at substack.com/Hyrox Hub. If you want to read a little bit more about marker sessions, I'll put a link in the description. And yeah, that's it. Episode 53. Chris will be back on deck next week. And then I've got an exercise physiologist lined up. I've got an Australian track coach lined up that just spent some time at the Olympic Games as well, so that should be a bit of fun. He's coached a hurdles athlete and one of the Paralympians as well, I believe. So, yeah. Anyway, hope you have a great weekend, and bye for now.